Hey there, how's it going everybody? In this video, we'll continue with our Flask series by learning how to create forms and also how to validate user input. So the application that we're going to be creating is going to have the ability for users to create accounts, log in, make posts, and log out and things like that. And the first part of that process is to create a registration page where a user can create an account on the website and then be able to log in and log out. And that's what we're going to be doing in this video. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, if you were to create forms from scratch, then that can get pretty complicated pretty fast. You would have to put in different kinds of validation checks to make sure that the user was inserting information correctly. You'd also have to make sure that their passwords matched, and you might have to write some regular expressions to make sure that they entered a valid email and things like that. But luckily, this process is so common that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are extensions out there that have already put in all the hard work so that you don't have to. And the most popular extension for working with forms in Flask is called wtforms, and that's what we're going to be using in this video. So first we have to install this, and we can do this with a simple pip install. So I'm here within my virtual environment, but you could also do this without a virtual environment. So I will say pip install, and that is flask-wtf for wtforms. So we'll run that and go through the installation. And once that's installed, I'm going to open up our existing project in our text editor. So I'm going to open up Sublime Text here. And now let's create a file where we can put these forms. So I'm going to create another file in our project directory, and I'm going to call this forms.py. Now, these forms could go directly into that application module that we've been writing, but it's best to split things like this out into their own files so that everything has its own place. That way, if we need to update a form in the future, then we know exactly where to look. So it's better to have this stuff split up into smaller, more manageable sections of code rather than one larger application file where everything is in one place and hard to find. Okay, so now within this file, let's create our forms. So first, let's import this into our application by saying from flask_wtf import, and we want to import flask form. Now, if you've done web development for some time, then you may be used to writing forms in HTML, and this is going to be a little different using this Flask extension. So we will actually be writing Python classes that will be representative of our forms, and then they will automatically be converted into HTML forms within our template. So let's see how to do this. So let's say that we wanted to create a registration form, then we can create a registration form class. So I'm going to come down here and say class, and then we will call this registration form, and this will inherit from Flask form. And now within our form, we're going to have different form fields, and these form fields are all going to be imported classes as well. So for example, let's say that the first field that we want in our form is a username, and the username is going to be a string field. And this won't be imported from the flask-wtf package, but instead the wtforms package. And that was also installed with the pip install. So we don't need to do anything extra there. So we can just say from wtforms, and then we can import this string field class. And now within our registration form class, we can create a new attribute, and we can just say username is equal to, and then this will be a string field. And then the first argument here is the name of this field. So I'll call this username, and that is also going to be used as the label in our HTML. Okay, so that's easy enough to create that. But now, also when it comes to usernames, there might be a few limitations that we want to put in place. So first of all, we want to make sure they actually put something for their username and just don't leave it empty or blank. Second, we wouldn't want a user to be able to create a username that's 50 characters long, because then it would look weird on our website. So let's say that we want to allow usernames that are between 2 and 20 characters. So to put these checks and validations in place, we can use something called validators, and they will be another argument that we pass into our field. So let's add a list of what we want validated by coming in here and passing in another argument, and this will be validators, and this is going to be equal to a list of validations that we want to check. And just like with the fields, these validators are also going to be classes that we import. So to make sure a field isn't empty, we can use the data required validator. So let's import that. And this is going to come from wtforms.validators, and then we can import that data required validator. And then we can just add that to our list of validators. So I'll copy that and paste it in here and put in these parentheses, and be sure that you have those parentheses after the class. Okay, so now if we want to make sure that the username is between 2 and 20 characters, then we can use the length validator. So let's include that in our imports. So after data required, I'll come up here and also import length. And now we can add this to our list of validators as well. So I'll say length, and then we'll actually pass in some arguments to this length. So I'll say min is equal to 2 and max is equal to 20. And this line is getting a little long here, so we can always break this up on multiple lines if need be. So now we can see that we have a list of validators here of data required, meaning that it can't be empty, and also a length validation that gives a minimum and a max amount that a username can be. And that's why using this extension is so convenient, because we don't have to write these from scratch. Okay, so moving on, let's write another field now. And the next field that we're going to want is an email. So I can just say email is equal to, and that's also going to be a string field. And the label that we want for that is going to be email. And let's also pass in some validators for this as well. So remember, this is going to be a list, and we want the data required for this email as well, because we don't want them to leave that empty. And also, we're going to want to make sure that this is a valid email address, and we can do that with the email validator. So we also need to import that. So up here at the top, we can just import email and then pass that into our list of validators as well. Okay, and lastly, for this registration form, we also need fields for a password and also a password confirmation. So we'll need to use a password field for those. So let's import that. So right after this string field, let's import password field, and now we can add these in. So I will say password is equal to this password field, and we just want the label to this to be password, and we also want some validators for this as well. So let's pass in validators, and the only one that we want for this is going to be data required. I mean, you could do a minimum length on this if you want, but we won't for this specific application. Okay, and now we also want a password confirmation. So that's basically going to be the same as this field here, but a little bit different. So I'll just call this confirm password. And for the label here, I'll say confirm password. And we will move these validators to the next line. And we just want that to be a data required validator, and that's good enough. Well, actually, there is going to be one more validation on this confirm password field, because we want to make sure that the password and the password confirmation are equal. So we need to use the equal to validator. So up here in our imports, I will import equal to, and then I'll add that to our list of validators for the confirm password field. So I will say equal to, and now the argument here is the field that we want this to be equal to. So we want this to be equal to the password field. So we'll save that. And let me make sure that I closed everything out here correctly, and I did. Okay, so that is good. So once we finish these forms, we now need a submit button to send that information to us. And we can do that with a submit field. So now we need to import that. So up here at the top, I will import submit field. And then we can add this field to our form just by coming down here into our class and then saying submit is equal to the submit field. And the label for this, since this is a registration form, I'll just say sign up as the label here. So that is going to finish up our registration form. So now let's create a login form that will be pretty similar. So I will just copy our registration form here and paste it underneath. And now we'll just change this around to be a login form instead of a registration form. So first, I'm going to change the name of our class, and I'll call this login form. Now, first of all, you can choose to either log in with the username or the email. It's up to you. I like logins that use email instead of usernames because it's easy to forget a username and it's less easy to forget your email. So I'm going to use the email as the login form there. And all of those validators for our email are going to remain the same. They will also need to log in with a password, and everything for that field will be the same. We no longer need a confirm password because they did that when they registered. And I'm also going to add a remember field to our login form. And this will allow users to stay logged in for some time after their browser closes using a secure cookie. So I'm going to put in a field here called remember, and this is going to be a Boolean field. So let's come back up here to our imports on these fields, and we're going to import Boolean field, which basically is a true or false. So we can paste this in down here. And we just want the label for this to be remember me. Now we need a submit button for this form as well, but instead of sign up, we want this label to be login. Okay, so that is going to do it for those two forms for now. Now, when we use these forms, we need to set a secret key for our application. A secret key will protect against modifying cookies and cross-site request forgery attacks and things like that. It's simple to do. We just need to go to the top of our application file here, and right under our app variable, we can set a secret key by saying app.config, and that is how you set config values on our application. And this is going to be the secret key, and we will set this equal to an empty string for now. And ideally, you want the secret key for your application to just be some random characters. Now, a good way to get a good set of random characters in Python is to pull up your command line and start the Python interpreter. So I will do that now. And I'm going to use this built-in secrets module. So I'm going to say import secrets. And to get a big random string of characters, I'm just going to use the token hex method on this. So I'm going to say secrets.token_hex. And then we can pass in a 16 here. And that 16 there is just the number of bytes. So now I have a pretty good random string here, and I'm just going to use this as my secret key in this video. So I'll exit out of our Python interpreter and clear the screen, and then go back to our application and paste that in here. And you'll likely want to make this an environment variable at some point, and we'll look at doing that later on in the series. Okay, so now let's use those forms that we created here in our application. So first we need to import those forms, and those are in the forms.py module. So, and it's within the same directory as this module here. So we can just import directly from that. So we can say from forms import, and that was the registration form, make sure I spell that correctly, and the login form. And now let's create some routes for our registration and login so that we can see how these get converted to HTML. So first, let's create the registration route. So down here above our main conditional, I'm going to create another route. So I'll copy one of these existing ones, and I will call this route register, and we need to change the function name as well. And now we need to create an instance of our form that we're going to send to our application. So we can say form is equal to registration form, and we want to put in the parentheses there to create an instance of that. And now we can pass this form to a template. Now we haven't created register or login templates yet, but we will in just a second. But I'll go ahead and pretend that they're there for now. So I will say down here at the bottom, return render template, and we will create a template called register.html. So that's what I'll fill in there. So now we can add in some additional information here. So I'll pass in a title of register for that page. And also we want to pass in our form. So I'll just say form is equal to form. That way within that template, we have access to this form instance here. And now let's do the same thing for a login route. Now this is going to be pretty similar, so I'm just going to copy our entire register route here and then change a few things. So I will change the route and the function name to login. We want this to be our login form. We want to render the login.html template. We want the title to be login, and we can say form equals form because now we're going to be passing in that instance of the login form. So now that we have these routes created, now we just need to create the templates that use these form variables that we just passed in. So let's go ahead and create those templates. So up here in my templates directory, I am going to create two new files. So I will create register.html, and I will also create a new file called login.html. And now let's grab some code from our About page just to get us started. So everything that just extends the layout and opens up that content block. So I will do my register route first. So I'll paste that in here. So we can see that we're already extending our layout template, and we learned how to do that in the last video when we looked at templates. And now we want to put our form in the content section of this page. And to do this, there's going to be a little bit of typing, so bear with me here. But I will open up a div, and this div, I want to give the class of content section. This is a style that I have in our main.css file that will just make this look a little nicer. And now we want to open up a form tag. So we'll say form, and we want the method of this form to be equal to post, and we want the action here, we'll just set the action equal to an empty string. Now that means that when we post this form, it's just going to go back to the same route. It's going to post that information to the same route that we're currently on. Okay, so now we're ready to start putting in some form fields here. Now the first field that we need is going to be one called form.hidden_tag. Now remember, when you're actually accessing variables in our template, you do have to wrap it in these double curly braces here. And then we are accessing the form instance that we passed in to this template. And now we're using this hidden tag method here. Now that hidden tag is something that you need to add in, but don't worry too much about what it does. It's adding something called a CSRF token, or a cross-site request forgery token. And when I said earlier that setting our secret key for our application would protect our form against certain attacks, well, this hidden tag here is part of that protection. So add it in, but you don't need to worry about the underlying details, but you definitely need it. Okay, so now let's add in our other form fields here. And I'm also going to add a couple of HTML and CSS classes here as well. So I'll add a field set, and we'll set a class here equal to form group. And this is all bootstrap stuff just to make this look a little nicer. And then we will pass in a legend. So this is going to be the legend for our register form. So I want this to say, we'll say just join today. And let's also give this some classes as well. So I will give this a class of border bottom, and also MB4, which is just a margin bottom with a value of 4. And now let's create our form groups, and those are going to be within divs. So I'm going to give this a class of form group as well. So form-group, and within this div, now this is where we're going to actually use the fields from our form that we passed in. So we're going to want those double curly braces, and now we can say form.username.label, and that will print out the label from our username field. Now we also want to give this a class as well. So we can do that by putting in some parentheses here and passing in a class argument. So I'll say class is equal to, and we want this equal to a form control dash label. And again, this is, this should be a dash here. And again, this is just some bootstrap stuff to make these look nicer. Okay, so that would actually print out the form label there, but we also want the field itself. So I'm going to copy this and paste it in here, but instead of just the label, I'm going to do form.username. And the classes that I'm going to use for that is going to be form control, and also form control -LG for large. Okay, so now that we have one of those, we can just copy and paste this for the rest of these. So we'll do another form group here. The next form group will be the email. So I will change both of those there to form.email.label and form.email, and we'll keep those same classes. And now we want to do the password field. So I will paste that div in again. And instead of username, we want to change this to use that password field, and leave the same classes again. Now we want the confirm password field. So we'll paste that in again and change both of these to confirm_password. Now, if you're wondering where I'm getting these field names here, these are the variable names that we specified here within our class. So we want all of those to be equal to these variable names here. So go back to that register template. So that confirm password field is the last field that we want in our field set. Now we still have the submit button here. So I'm going to create another form field div here, and I just realized that all of these are spelled wrong, and I've been copying those the whole time. So I'm going to go back and change that. So I will highlight all of those that say dir. Those need to be div for div, and then I'll put a closing tag in for that one there. And now we want to put our submit button. So within this last form group here, I'll put in our double curly braces. We want to say form.submit. And we also want a class for this as well. So we'll say class is equal to, and we want a button class on this, btn, and also btn outline-info. And that's like in Bootstrap, that's a nice little bluish outline button that they will style for you. Okay, so that will do it for our form. Now, since we're on the register page, you'll see on a lot of websites, they'll have on the register page, it'll say, you know, do you already have an account? Well, if you have an account, then just go and sign in instead of creating a new account. So let's put something like that here as well. So we'll add in another div below our form here, actually below that div that the form was wrapped in. And we'll give this a class as well. So we'll say class is equal to, we'll give this a border of top and also a padding top of a value of 3. And now within here, let's do some small text. And let's give this small text a class of text-muted, and that just kind of fades out the text a little bit. And then we'll put in the text here, already have an account, ? And now we'll put in a link to the login page. So this is going to be an anchor tag. I'll give this anchor tag a class of a margin left of 2 just to give it some spacing from that text there. And now we want an href equal to, and we want this to link to our login page. So remember, if you want to link somewhere, it's always a good idea to use the URL for function. So we'll say URL_for, and we want to pass in the link to the login page. Now, just remember that the value that we're passing in to the URL for function is not the name of the route, it's the name of the route function. So if I go back to our application, we are actually passing in this value here, not this. So we want the name of the function. So that's what we have there. And now we need to close out this anchor tag. So I will give this text, I'll say, you know, just sign in, and then close out that anchor tag there. Okay, so it's been a while since we viewed our application in the browser. So let's save what we have now and see what we get so far. So let me save this. And now if I go back to our command line, then we can run our current application by saying Python and then the name of our application. So we didn't get any errors, so that's good. So let's open up our page. So that was localhost on port 5000. And now let's go to that register page that we just created and see if we get that form. So I'll say register and go to that form. And we can see that this looks pretty good so far. So we have our form legend here, and then it did get all of those forms that we created in our forms file. So we have our username, email, password, and confirm password. And down here is that link where it says already have an account, sign in. That'll take us to our login route, but we don't have anything in that template yet, so it's just a blank page. So let's go out and actually fill out this form. So I'm going to just fill in some values here and then submit this to see what it currently does. So now if I fill all that out and then click our submit button, then we can see that it returns a method not allowed error. And the reason that we get that is because it's submitting a post request back to the same register route with our form data, but we currently don't accept post requests in that route. So to accept a post request, we need to add a list of allowed methods in our route. So if I go back to Sublime here and go to our Flask application file up to our register route, then we can add a list of allowed methods by passing in an argument of methods is equal to, this is going to be a list, and we want this to be equal to get, so it accepts get requests, and also post, so it accepts post requests, which is what we just made in the browser. So now if I save that and go back to our browser and then reload our register page, and we can fill this out again. I'll just fill it out with some sample values here really fast, and then hit the submit button, then we can see that now we don't get that error, but now it just posts the data and directs us right back to the register page. So we have no idea if the form validated properly or not. So before we render our register template in our route, let's put in a check in place that checks whether we have post data and that data is valid for our form. So to do this, I'm going to go back to our application here. And after we create our form, but before we return our template, I'm going to use this validate on submit method. So I'll say if form.validate on submit. And as you can probably tell by the name, this will tell us if our form validated when it was submitted. So now I'm going to use something called a flash message. A flash message in Flask is an easy way for us to send a one-time alert. So first I'll have to import this, and this is from Flask. So from Flask, I will import flash and then come back down here to our conditional. And now we can add the message that we want to display when we've created a user successfully. So I will say flash and pass in a message of, and this is going to be an F string here since I'm going to pass in a variable. So I'll say account created for, and then we will pass in the form.username.data. Then we'll put an exclamation point after that as well. Now I'm using Python 3.6, and that's why I can use this F string here. I suggest that everyone use the latest version that they can, but if you're still below Python 3.6, then you're going to have to use the format method on that string to fill in that placeholder instead of this F string, because the F strings are only Python 3.6 and above. So if you get an error there, then that's probably what it is. Okay, so now we have a flashed message here, but I want to be able to tell the difference between the different kinds of alerts. So Bootstrap has different alert styles for successes and warnings and errors, and the Flask function accepts a second argument that is called a category. So I'm going to pass in the name of the Bootstrap class that I want this alert to have, and that is success. So I'll put in a comma and pass in a second argument to this flash function here, and this is going to be the string success. Okay, and now that we've got our flashed message, now let's redirect the user to a different page, because you don't want to fill out a form and then just get redirected back to the same form after you submit it. That would be a little confusing for the user. So instead, we'll redirect the user to the home page. So to do this, we're going to need to import the redirect function, and that is from Flask. So I'll come back up here to the top, and after our last import, I'll also import redirect, then come back down here inside of our conditional. So when the form validates properly, we will say return redirect, and we want to redirect to the URL for, so we use that URL for function again, and we want this to redirect to our home page. And again, that is the name of the function for that route. So we're redirecting to here. Okay, so this should all work except for one thing. We haven't updated our template to actually show the flashed messages yet. So I'm going to put this within our layout template so that flashed messages pop up on any page. So I'm going to open up our layout.html, and let's just assume that we want to display any of our flashed messages up here at the top of our content. So I will come down to our block content here. And now right above this content, I'm going to display these messages. So I'm going to open up a code block. So that is a curly brace, 2 parentheses, and then the closed curly brace. And let me get rid of that one there. And in this code block, we're going to use a with statement. So I will say with messages equal to get flashed messages, and this is a function that will get the flashed messages that we send to this template. And we want to also pass in an argument here of with categories equal to true. Now that with categories equal to true will allow us to grab this success category that we passed in to that flashed message, which is the Bootstrap class that we're going to use. And so now I'm going to close off this block. So I will put in a closed block here and say end with. Now within our block here, now we want to print out any messages if there were messages returned from this get flashed messages function. So we can open up another code block and we'll say if messages, and then we'll also close off that code block as well. So we'll say end if, and now within here, this will mean that if messages was not empty, then it means that we have some flashed messages to display. So now we can loop over those flashed messages. So I'm going to open up another code block. I know this is getting a little nested here, but we can say for category, comma, message in those messages. So since we said with categories equal true, we're going to get two values from these messages. So for category and message in messages, and now we can end this block as well. So we'll say end for, and now within here, we can finally print out this message. So I will create a div within here, and this div, I'm going to give a class equal to, and we want to set this equal to alert, and also alert dash, and then the category value. So if we want to put in a value, we need those double curly braces, and we're going to set this equal to category. So for example, since we passed in success, this class is going to be assigned alert dash success. And we'll see this in action in just a second. So now within this div, we want to actually print out this message. So I'll just pass in our message variable within our curly braces there. Okay, so now that we have all of that in place, let's make sure that it all works if our form validates properly. So let's open back up our site. Let's make sure that our server's still running, and it's not. So you might see this sometimes if you actually save your file and there's a syntax error at the time that you save it, then it might shut down your development server. So to run that again, you can just rerun the file again. So now we don't have any errors, so that's good. So let's go back to our site and reload our register page and load that up. And now I'm going to fill out this form correctly so that it will validate. So I'm going to pass in valid emails and passwords and all of that. And now if I submit this valid form, then we can see that we got redirected back to our home page with our flash message that an account was created for our username. And in that case, our username was CMS. Now, we didn't actually create an account for that user. We will need a database for that, and that is what we'll be covering in the next video. But now we know our forms are validating correctly and giving us some feedback. Now, these flash messages are nice, but like I said, they are only a one-time alert. So if I reload this homepage, then we can see that that flash message goes away. Okay, so lastly, let's give some validation feedback to our end user so that if they input incorrect information, then they know exactly what it is that they did wrong and what they need to fix. So if I go back to our registration form, and if I fill this out, but I give a bad email address, I'll just put in some gibberish there and do the password correct, then submit that. Then we can see that it just sends us back to our form because our form was invalid, but we have no feedback for our user as to why it was invalid. So let's go back to our registration template and fix this. So I'll open back up our editor here and open up that register template. So for each field that we have here, each of those fields will actually have a list of errors if that field was invalid. So we can open up a conditional and print out those errors. So the way that this is done in Bootstrap is that you add a class of isInvalid to your field, and then you put a div underneath that with the class of invalidFeedback, and then put in the error there. So let's see what this looks like. So I'm going to go underneath our label here, and I'm going to just keep this valid feedback form here. And now let's put in one that has errors. So I'm going to open up a code block here, and this is going to be an if statement. So I'll say if form.username.errors. So it's only going to hit this conditional if we have any errors. And then I can end this if block. So I will put in a code block here and say end if. And now within here, we want our username field just like we have on the outside here, but we also want to add a class of isInvalid to that field. And underneath that invalid field, we also want to give a div with a class equal to invalid-feedback. And now within this div, we want to print out all of the errors that we have. So I'll open up another code block here, and this is going to be a for loop. So we'll say for errors in, and fix that typo there. So we're going to say for errors in form.username.errors. I'll just copy and paste that there. And then I will close out this for loop by saying end for. And we will just print out a span of all of these errors. So we want to print out this error. And actually, here I should have said for error in errors, not errors. So I will print out that error variable there from the for loop. Okay, so I know that this is kind of a long section here, but hopefully that all made sense. So if our form had errors on it, then it will print out this form field and also these errors. But if we have no errors, then we just want to print out what we had before. So we can put this inside of the else block of this if statement. So I will put in an else here, and that is where we will move the valid form or the valid field from that section. So I will paste that in there. Now, I know that this can look like a lot here just to print out the validation errors, and honestly, forms and validation is really where the Flask Bootstrap extension has some advantages, but I still like doing these myself because I like to be able to easily be able to make design decisions if I want to change the look of something, and I feel like you just have more control over doing that if you do it manually. Okay, so now we want to put in these validation errors for all of the form or all of the field sections in our form. So I'm going to copy and paste this in every section. So I'm just going to overwrite the valid input for the email and also for the password and also for the confirm password. Now I just pasted in the username field for all of those. So now I'm going to change that. Now I'm going to use the multi-cursor functionality within Sublime Text, but you could use a find and replace functionality within your editor. So within Sublime Text, I can just highlight all of these here and change these all at once. So instead of form.username, we want that to be form.email. So now I'll go down here to our password group and change these usernames to password. And now go down here to our confirm password group, highlight all those usernames, and change that to confirm password. Now, if you misspelled any of this or run into any problems at this point, then remember I do have all of this source code for these videos on my GitHub, and you can always copy and paste from there so that you can be sure that you didn't make any small mistakes here or there. And the link for that is in the description section below. Okay, so speaking of which, let's make sure that I didn't make any small mistakes by making sure that this form validation is now working. So let's save that and make sure that our server is still running, and it is, and pull up our website, and we will reload our register page. And first, let's just submit a form with 0 information. So if I just submit this form, then we can see that we get the feedback on every single field that says that this field is required. And it's those Bootstrap classes that we added in that handles the coloring of the red text and the red outline on the actual field there. So now if I put a username that is too short, remember we said that a username has to be at least 2 characters, and also an invalid email. So I'll just put in an email of Corey, and also I'll put in passwords that don't match. So I'll do this one and just say testing, and then this one I'll put in some gibberish. So now if I hit submit, then we can see now that it's telling us that our field must be between 2 and 20 characters long, and that we have an invalid email address, and also that this field must be equal to the password. And if we had multiple errors on any of these, then it would show all of those as well. So we're getting some good feedback here to let the user know exactly what they need to fix in order to create their account properly. Okay, so we're almost finished up, but we were also going to do our login page. Now, this is going to be a lot faster because we've already done most of this work for the register page. So let's copy our register template to our login template. So I'll go back to our page here and copy this big, long register template here into our blank login template. And now there are some things that we need to change with this form. So here at the top, we will change our legend, and our legend we will change to log in. And remember, we were logging in with our email and not our username. So I'm just going to get rid of this entire form group div here that contained our username. So I'll get rid of that. We're going to keep the email. We are going to keep the password. This confirm password we no longer need, so we can get rid of that form group. Now we did have that remember me field that we needed to add in, but this is going to be a little different from the other fields. So this is going to be a div, and this is going to be a bootstrap class equal to form-check, since it's going to be a checkbox. And we don't need any complicated validations here because this is either going to be checked or not checked. There's not really anything that you can do wrong here. So now we can just put in these field values. So first I'll put in the checkbox. So we'll say form.remember, and we want to pass a class into this. So we will say that this class is equal to form-check-input. And also we want to pass in the label for this field. So we'll just copy that, paste it in below here. So this is going to be form.remember.label. And instead of form check input, this is going to be form check label for the class there. Now also on most login pages, you'll see a link for if you forgot your password, then you can do a password reset. So let's add one of those in as well. So I'll put that right after our submit button. And right after our submit button, I'll just do a small tag here, and I'll give this a class of text muted, just to make that a little subtle. I'll also give it a margin left of 2, just to spread it away from that submit button a little bit. And now we want to add in an anchor tag here. Now we don't have a URL for this forgot password link yet. That we'll be doing later in the series. So if you ever just want to do a dummy link, then you can just put in a £sign there, and that will just be a link that goes nowhere. So for the text for this link, I'll say forgot password with a question mark. And also on our register page, I said that there's usually something that says, you know, do you already have an account? Well, then you can sign in here. Also on most login pages, you'll see something that says something like, well, do you need an account? Well, you can register here. So that's what we'll put here. So we'll say need an account. And instead of putting a URL for our login page, we'll put in a URL for our register page. And the text for this link will just say sign up now. Okay, so now with those changes in place, if we save those and pull back up our website, so our server's still running, if now we go to our login page, then we can see that now we have our login form. Okay, so this is looking pretty good. Now we don't currently have any users, but let's put some temporary code in here to simulate a successful login. So I'm going to go back to our application code and go down to our login route. And we also want to see if this form is valid on submission as well. So we'll copy this conditional here and paste this in. Now that means that we also need to accept post requests to this route as well. So just like we did with our register route, let's copy this section that allows post requests to our login route. And now within our conditional, let's just put in some fake data here for now to simulate a successful login. So I'm just going to say if form.email.data, so that's the data that was submitted in the email form, if that is equal to admin@blog.com and our form.password.data is equal to, and we will just do a password of password, which is normally a bad idea, but this is just going to be temporary here until we get our database set up. So if they submit our login form with an email of admin@blog.com and a password of password, then we want to simulate a successful login. So we'll do a flashed message like we saw before, and this is just going to say, you have been logged in, ! And remember, we want to pass in a category in here. That'll be the bootstrap class, and that'll be a bootstrap class of success. And then we can return a redirect to our homepage. So we'll do URL 4 and go to that home route. And now we'll just say that any other submissions are invalid. So we will put in an else statement here. So anything that isn't an email of admin blog and a password of password, then we'll say that that's an unsuccessful login. So we will put in a flash message here and say login unsuccessful. Please check username and password. Okay, now instead of passing in a category of success there, we really want this to be like a red alert. And in Bootstrap, that class is called danger for the alert. And now, at this point, we don't want to return anything because it will just fall down here to this render template where it renders the login page again. So I will clean that up a bit and save that. Okay, so if we did all of that correctly, then we should be able to do a fake login with the email that we specified here and our fake password. So let's make sure. Okay, so I saved that when we had a mistake in our file. So if I rerun our server there, now our server is running, so our website should be running as well. I'll go back and reload our login page, and let's just try to log in with some incorrect credentials. So I'll say test@test.com and some made up password. So if I log in, then we can see that we get that red danger alert that says login unsuccessful, please check username and password. So now if we change this to what we specified, so admin@blog.com and a password of password, if we log in, we get redirected to our home route and it says you have been logged in. Okay, so now one very quick thing here, and then we'll be finished up with the video. When I pasted in the snippet of our navigation bar into our layout template, the navigation bar currently is using direct links to our different routes, and this works fine sometimes, but if we ever change our routes for any reason, then we want our website to pick that up automatically instead of us needing to remember to change it in multiple locations. And as we've seen several times now, we can do this with that URL for function that we've already used a couple of times. And you definitely want to utilize that function a lot because it makes linking to different pages pretty effortless. So the only reason I didn't do this in the last video is because our login and register routes didn't exist yet, and using URL for to a non-existent route will throw an error. So let's see what this looks like to convert existing links to use that URL for function. So let's go back to our project and open up our layout template. So I still have that open here. And now we want to go down to our navigation links. So our navigation links are up here in our header, so they are right here. And right now you can see that these are direct links to, /about, /login. But instead, let's change these to use the URL for function. So I will put in those double curly braces, say URL for, and we want this to be the URL for home. And I'll just copy this and do the same for our other routes. So this will be the URL for about. This will be the URL for login, and this will be the URL for register. So just to make sure that worked, if we go back to our website and reload our homepage, then we should be able to click around and see the forms that we've created and go to all of these different links with no problem. Okay, so I think that is going to do it for this video. I hope that now you have a good understanding for how we can work with forms in Flask and also how we can validate the data that the user sends to our route. And in the next video, we'll learn how to use a database so that we can actually store this information and implement a real registration and login system. So if anyone has any questions about what we covered in this video, then feel free to ask in the comment section below and I'll do my best to answer those. And if you enjoyed these tutorials and would like to support them, then there are several ways you can do that. The easiest way is to simply like the video and give it a thumbs up. And also it's a huge help to share these videos with anyone who you think would find them useful. And if you have the means, you can contribute through Patreon, and there's a link to that page in the description section below. Be sure to subscribe for future videos, and thank you all for watching.